How and why did you become involved in the Back to 60 campaign?
Well, I began to get involved originally with WASPI in about 2016, which would have been my age of 60 when my pension would normally have been payable. But they changed their direction in becoming a closed shop and charging a membership fee, which I felt very uncomfortable about because women, myself included, were already financially stretched. And at around the same time, I began to follow Joanne Welch, who spoke separately for pensionless women. And I liked what she said. And I liked the fact that she was going to use crowdfunding to get a case started. And so I've been a firm follower of hers ever since. And she actually is the person that got the legal cases into the courts, not WASPI.
Right.
So I'm glad I diverted.
Good. Fine. And so please can you tell us what you knew about the notice of deferrals of the state pension age when this would accrue, and what impact has this had on you personally, if it's had any impact? So one, what did you know about this change and when did it come to your attention? And then what impact, if any, has it had on you?
Well, I could go back as far as 1991 to 1994, when I was an NHS pensions officer in South Devon, responsible for the pensions of 4,600 staff employees. And so you'd think that I would have known all about it. It was part of my job, but actually I knew nothing about it. And that was at the time that the legislation was allegedly being discussed in Parliament, and the bill drafted that became the law in 1995 that changed everything. So I actually moved to Spain in 2005 at the end of a 28-year marriage. And in 2007, whilst I was abroad, I decided at age 51 to find out what my pension would be were I to become fully divorced, finally. And I wrote from Spain with my Spanish address in my own name. And somehow the DWP managed to join up my record with my husband, from whom I was estranged. And they actually replied to him. And they addressed it to him. They addressed the beginning of the letter, "Dear Mr. Hinder, and please find below state pension forecast for Mrs. Pauline Hinder, care of 60 Compass Quay." So they actually have my address in Spain, and they wrote to him. He sent it on to me with a little post-it note saying, "I don't know if you've requested this, it's come to me, but I didn't ask for it." So I actually received information about my state pension in 2007. And although the letter is 4 pages long, at no point does it mention in that letter that my state pension age had increased. And by this time, it was already 7 years, 1995, it was already 12 years since the legislation changed. But what they did do was send me a booklet about state pension age changes, and it said, "Understanding Your State Pension Forecast." And this book is over 30 pages long, and buried in amongst that is the information that state pension age was changing. So it was interesting that DWP didn't tell me directly, overtly in the letter. They put it covertly in the leaflet. And at that time in 2007, it was the beginning of the crash. So I had a lot going on in my life. And in 2008, my husband, or my estranged husband, put forward divorce papers and sent them to me in Spain, where I had no access to UK legal help. And he asked to divorce me because we'd been separated for the long enough period. So I signed the forms without actually taking any legal advice, and without thinking what I was doing, quite frankly. I must have been under pressure over there to have not done that. So the notice of deferral, the first overt one I had from them was in 2011. When I wrote and asked them for a further forecast. And that's when it actually said in the letter that my state pension age was going to be 65 and not 60. By this time I was 56. And I had to apply to stay because the crash had actually bitten by this time. I was in the estate agency business abroad. And so that affected me quite dramatically. So I applied for payment of my civil service pension at 55, but I was forced, because of the rules of the scheme, to take a 20% reduction because I'd had it 5 years early. And that reduction is for life. So that affected, I had no pension from my husband, one. I had no pension sharing order, rather, from my husband. I had quite effectively reduced small private pension from my previous civil service. And it was just horrendous. It was one thing after another. And in the middle of all of 2009, my mother passed away. And she actually passed away at Bristol Airport, flying to come to see me. So it was a disaster. And I think, had I known in 2005 that I wasn't going to receive my pension at age 60, it may have made a significant difference to my decision to move abroad. I would undoubtedly have stayed in England, and in that case, I would have fought for my pension sharing order from my ex-husband, because he was far wealthier than me when we terminated our relationship. And in 2011, all the pigeons came home to roost, and following on from that, everything else was affected by the lack of notice of the deferral. In 2012, I had a biopsy because I was having some irregular bleeding. And in January of 2013, I was diagnosed with first cancer. And subsequently, I had a second cancer, a different one, different type of cancer in a different type of part of my body. That was in 2014. And in the meantime, if that wasn't enough, I returned to England, but I managed to secure a job at the MOD in between whiles, back as a civil servant again. But following the recovery, I was desperate to retain my job, which I really enjoyed. I was a commercial officer at the MOD, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't cope with the health issues. And because I lost my job, I was retired on ill health grounds. I was then forced to move from my private rented accommodation, which was lovely, into social housing, and came up against the DWP once again from 2017 with 5 tribunals to obtain the correct benefits. And I've been on that mostly up until last year. I've been on benefits because of health complications that came from the 2 cancers. And it's really impacted all of my life. So it impacted my health, my housing, my mental well-being, and it changed my 3 pension options that I had: my state pension, my divorce pension, and my private civil service pension. So it's been extremely difficult. Excuse me.
on mute. I'm sorry, I really am sorry about all of this, but particularly also about the impact of your mother's death. That must have been extraordinarily distressing.
Yes, it was, because I had to come back. And my ex-husband was at the funeral with one of my friends, which is awful on top of everything else. So, yes, it's been a terrible time, but I'm coming out the other side of it and helping with this cause has given me hope. And I know that there are a lot of women who've not even been able to remain alive, and I just feel terrible for them, you know, and all because of this. And I've done a lot of research on behalf of Back to 60 and for the CEDAW campaign. And I mean, the EU legislation that the government said was necessary to change the state pension age actually referred to private pension schemes. So like my civil service and, you know, private ones that you pay direct to yourself, it's nothing to do. It was never anything to do with the state pension scheme. And they just use that as an opportunity 3 times now to save money. Once in 1995, again in 2011, when the coalition government moved the age by a year yet again, a year again for women. That meant 6 years in total and only 1 year for men to save money. And then finally, George Osborne boasting about it all. So it's all been done for money, really, with no thought, no impact assessments for people like myself and what we've had to go through.
Or any attention paid to the government obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, apparently.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, you've said that you've done a deal of research. And can you explain the economic situation in the United Kingdom in the early 1990s before the government considered this legislation to increase the age of retirement for women under the State Pension Act? And how do you consider that this impacted on the decision to do this deferral of the state pension age accrual for women? The early 1990s, the situation at the time, then the prospect of this change to the state pension age for women, targeting women.
Well, the most significant thing I can recall from the early 90s was because I was a pensions officer in the NHS. I actually was co-opted onto a committee for helping to write all the software so that you could get estimates quickly on NHS pensions, which you couldn't originally. So I had meetings with other pensions officers every month. So that I had quite a network of information and support about what was going on generally and was impacting us in the future. And that was from 1991 to 1994. So it's actually a really crucial period that my expertise and knowledge, if you like, was covering. And in 1992, I beg your pardon, I went on holiday to Florida, and the day we went just happened to be Black Wednesday, 16th of September 1992. And we actually flew out on that day, and it was a day, I think the dollar was 2.5 to the pound before that day. And it dropped to about $1.50 because there was a run on sterling in the financial stock markets in England, and the Bank of England was directed from, I have seen a documentary on television about it as well, because the cabinet was holed up in the Admiralty in London, directing the Bank of England what to do at sort of minute by minute to stop this crisis. And we had to withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism because of the mess that was made of sterling. And that cost the Bank of England, and therefore the Treasury and the taxpayer, a heck of a lot of money. And that money wasn't anticipated about being spent before. It was just that there was a run on sterling. And where was the Treasury going to get all of that additional money? Well, funnily enough, the then minister, Peter Lilly, who was minister at the Department for Social Security, which is now the DWP, he was already in 1993 giving lectures, one of which I found is called the Mays Lecture. It was a group of lectures done monthly, and they were done by very senior people like the PM, Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Governor of the Bank of England, to staff and to interested parties. But it was a private club, and Peter Lilly produced a document of which I've managed to obtain a copy, and in that document he states that he gave these lectures, and when he actually talked in his lecture, he said that they were we frail men. So he was talking himself as a man to a lot of men, and he was making the case in these lectures and in this pamphlet for women and men's age of retirement to be equal. He's saying there's no reason why women have to wait until 65. So he's talking here about the state pension. So that was in 1993. Then in 1995 comes the State Pension Act, which changed the SPA that hadn't been changed for a very long time. Meanwhile, everybody else in the public probably heard about Maxwell's robbery, his pension theft, all around the world. I would imagine people had heard about it. And people knew about that, but nobody ever talked about state pension age going up. Maxwell's theft was like a blanket of it over all of the information. And all of this was going on in the early 90s. And I know from staff in the NHS that it affected their pension choices. Some of the people didn't even think the NHS pension was worth staying in because it was government run. Could it be stolen? Would it be better going into private schemes? So it's all actually directly connected. Black Wednesday, the choice to move women's pension ages up, which has saved a lot of money, and then the actual act bringing it all to fruition. So I think it's all directly connected, what happened in the 1990s, and women have been paying for that ever since, 50s born women.
You did earlier refer to the issue of when this came to your attention.
Yes.
But do you have any general comment to make on the notification or lack of notification by government on top of this information that you've just imparted to us about the circumstances at the time that led to the passage of the 1995 Act?
Well, sorry, Lauren, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, please go ahead. I was interrupting you.
Well, I think it was a parlous lack of a notification to the women. They hid it in things like big, thick books. They posted information about it apparently in the Financial Times. They have no record. I actually wrote and asked them where they actually advertised that the state pension age was changing. And they couldn't say specifically. I think it's only since about the turn of the millennium that they have kept better records about where they were advertising things and where they were, how they were letting people know. So I think it's appalling for a government department. I mean, I think it's appalling that a government department can write to my husband about my information, especially as I didn't want him to know what my future plans were. But it's been appalling how they haven't told women, and they've said, well, it's your fault, you know, we put it all out there, you should have known about it. And it didn't end there, because this year I reached my state pension age of 66. And I began back in 2020 making detailed records of my national insurance. I made sure that the revenue, the inland revenue, was aware that I was divorced, because that was affecting my state pension. And I also wrote to the Future Pensions Department, and I got a wonderful letter back to them, which I had specifically requested, detailing every which way my pension could be calculated. And they sent that back to me with all of the correct information. So I had everything planned, all key boxes ticked. And then late last year, I was able actually to finally apply to receive my pension. And I'd had estimates from the DWP a year ago in January, so that was January 2021, telling me I would be receiving about £141 a week in pension, because I had my pension based on my ex-husband's national insurance record, because I paid what used to be called the married woman's stamp. And the new pension scheme actually allows for me to have some extra guarantee on my pension based on my ex-husband's record. But that guarantee is limited to whatever national insurance he'd accrued in up to 2016, not after that date. So I've even lost a potential 6 years that I've actually paid for myself. I cannot add to that record and enhance my state pension. They won't allow me by the terms. So I've been shortchanged there by government legislation as well. But on top of that, when I actually had my final award notice in January this year, they actually offered me 50% of my entitlement. They told me I was only going to be receiving £68 a week. And I was furious, because I knew that that was wrong. And we've had countless cases here prior to this, where women have been underpaid, that were divorced, that were widowed, etc. And the DWP had already promised, I think they were doing their third or more investigation into all their mistakes. And yet again, they made a mistake on mine. So I rang them up, got batted off by their answering service, by people they had there saying, no, leave it with us, we'll contact you in 4 weeks. Leave it with us, we'll contact you in 4 weeks. And I was only 2 months away from receiving my pension. So in the end, I was so exasperated, I contacted Sir Steve Webb, who used to be the DWP minister in a coalition government in 2011, who I'm sorry to say was the name on the paper for moving SPA up 1 more year. So I wrote to him, because he's now back in private industry, and I said, look, I'm having terrible trouble with the DWP, can you help me? He immediately wrote back to me by email, said, give me your written permission, give me all of your evidence, and I'll see what I can do. And within less than 24 hours, bearing in mind this was already a month later, but within 24 hours, I had a phone call from the Department of Works and Pensions telling me that they'd made a terrible mistake on my pension. So I knew they had, I knew very well. And, you know, I've done everything in my power to make sure they had all of the correct information. And 2 days later than that, I had a new notification. My pension had now gone up to about 144, something like that a week. And from my birthday, they paid me my pension correctly. But if I hadn't have had that other way of going about things, contacting somebody completely off the cuff about it and not connected now with the DWP, I would still probably be sat here trying to manage on a 50% pension. I think it's just disgusting. And David Henke, who's done a lot to support our cause, has just actually in the last 24 hours, I believe it was, reported again on the multiple mistakes by the DWP. Even more are coming out of woodwork. So, you know, it's been a long journey.
Did you have that, you know, the book that you said, the lengthy book that they sent to you with a letter that didn't disclose? Yeah, I was just going to say, if you'd hold it up, let us look at it on screen. And do you have noted the page at which they made this comment about the age change?
Okay.
I just
They have actually in the front got a list. So it's age 5 in there. It says about state pension age.
Is it very lengthy? I was wondering if you could read it to us, what it says, or is it terribly lengthy?
No, it says, it tells you, you know, that obviously this comes with the forecast letter, because that's how that page starts. But down here it says, a state pension age. This is the earliest age at which you can start receiving your basic state pension, and is currently 65 for men and ranges from 60 to 65 for women. State pension age for women will be increased gradually from 2010. So by 2020, the state pension age will be 65 for both men and women.
And did it say at that point whom you could contact to find out what, you know, what age it was for you? You know, what age it was for the person reading the booklet? I'm just wondering how you see. Because it busily tells people, women, that the age is changing, but it just says a range, doesn't it? So where do I find out that I fit into the range, or where do you find out, or where does any of these 2.7 million women, if they're fortunate enough to receive that booklet, find out where they fit in this grand scale of things?
Well, I'm just sorry.
No. No, I'm putting the question to you because then it's apparent, isn't it, that it's not readily able to be found. And then one has to receive the booklet, and it was fortuitous really that you received it. And I doubt seriously, though I'm ready to be proven wrong by any government operative, that I find it difficult to believe that 2.7 million women received this booklet.
Well, it obviously came as a response to my request forecast. So if you didn't ask or had no reason to ask for a forecast, you probably didn't receive the book. No. And the golden opportunity, because the DWP would have had the table of ages at which you could get your state pension. The golden opportunity would have been in my personal quote to say, this is what you're going to get, and this is the age from which you'll receive it, unless the law changes.
And it's not in that letter. No, the cover letter. Good. Now, just two last questions. Are you aware of any measures that the Parliament could have taken, or have I already covered that? The Parliament, when the Parliament, Parliament it is that made the change and passed the Pensions Act of 95 and then 2011. Are you aware of any actions that the Parliament could have taken to ensure that either this didn't happen or that women knew that it was happening?
Well, when I started my job at the MOD, which was in 2013, I was reacquainted with things like risk assessment. So I actually sent a Freedom of Information request to the DWP asking if any impact assessments were done, and they declared that they weren't. So the government should have done it. And in fact, I have checked on the internet, and it said that from the 1980s, risk assessments or impact assessments were actually a government tool. But for some reason, they decided that, probably cost, they decided that 3.8 million women weren't worth it. So they could have done impact assessments, because I mean, clearly in my own circumstances, it impacted my life hugely. If I'd have still been married, it would have probably been livable, because, you know, my husband and I earned serious money between us. But once I was divorced, I became like a different person, really, because of my socioeconomic status. So I think that they could have done more. I mean, we've seen cases of publicity that the DWP has done, but again, that was covert. They had like 2 dogs on a beach. Well, are women dogs? Was that the message? Why would a woman look at that and think it referred to her? It was ridiculous. I don't know who was in charge of the campaigns, but somebody was having a laugh at our expense. And, you know, I think it's awful. What they could have and should have done more.
Good. Yeah, well, as I said before, not good. So, as you know, the Cedar People's Tribunal held hearings last year in June, and the outcome was that the plea for a Women's Bill of Rights for this country to honour the obligation that the country entered into when ratifying CEDAW. So do you consider that having a Women's Bill of Rights for the United Kingdom would have any value or impact for women in this union, in the United Kingdom?
Definitely. I mean, it's raised our case for starters in the public domain more widely. I mean, people know about WASPI, but WASPI have gone off on a different tangent. And I think there are so many issues that women are shortchanged on, and that CEDAW can make a difference in our lives. You know, I think it's bonkers in such a wealthy country that things aren't spread equally. But if it takes CEDAW to sort that out, Mrs. Thatcher must have thought we had a need for it to have signed up to it. But there was a woman who was extremely opinionated, informed, and she thought it was a good idea. I mean, nothing was done afterwards, unfortunately, but you know, she saw the need for having CEDAW all that long time ago. So I think, yes, CEDAW is necessary, and it will make a difference in many ways.
Well, it's 40 years since we signed it, and it's nearly 30 since we ratified it. So it's a very long time. That's true. Yeah. And so are there any further remarks that you'd like to make on this issue before we say thank you?
Well, I just think that the government needs to appoint a representative, a permanent representative in this country, and not just pay lip service saying that there's nothing that we need to do because it's all covered by laws here anyway, because clearly it isn't. And our case has proved that. It's a standing cause that actually says that everything that they've done has been wrong in our case, and unequal treatment for women. So we need CEDAW, and they're not doing enough to bring that forward, and we need a representative here to enforce matters.
Yeah. So a permanent CEDAW representative in and for the United Kingdom for women.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
It
good.
would be fantastic.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming then, Pauline. We really appreciate it. And we'll now move on to the next witness. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Your Honour. Thank you.